Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Now Israel and Raleigh Close series of Shirim. The Shirim tonight are dedicated to Nishmas Chaya Zelda Bas Menachem Mendel, Jenny Z. Gilbert, Zichrona Livracha, grandmother of Alison Cowan, whose yahrzeit was the 21st of Tammuz. We are delighted we have three speakers from Lahava tonight. Lahava is a group based in Israel, providing opportunities for Torah learning, but for post-Sem women, run by young women in the community and overseen by Rabbi and Robertson Zobin. We're really pleased that Mikhaela Mann, Tamara, Ezekial, and Ayelet Besso Cowan are speaking on what does Hashem want from us, the three fundamentals, focusing on three ideas from a posuk in Micha that God's asked of us to do justice, love chesed, and walk humbly. So first of all, we have Mikhaela Mann speaking on Ahavas Chesed, building our eternity. Mikhaela is currently working as a madricha in Sem in Israel in Shalvim, although she's just come back to London. That's what she's been doing. And that's where she went to Sem herself. She's finishing this summer the final year of her biomedical sciences degree at King's College London online. She's hoping to continue as a madricha for the coming year at Shalvim, teaching Torah classes while studying for a master's program in psychology in Israel. I hand over to you now, Mikhaela, and thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. She wanted to first of all say thank you so much to everyone. It really is a huge opportunity for us to be able to share words of Torah on such an amazing platform. So really thank you to everyone who organized it and everyone here. It's very much appreciated. If it's okay with everyone, I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the sources as I'm going through it. Is everyone able to see my screen? Yeah. Okay. So I don't think I'm going to be able to go through all of it in person, but I just wanted to have all the sources there so that everything's over there. And if anybody wants it afterwards, I can either get the short to email it or try to get it to you somehow. But I have an amazing opportunity to speak about the midah of chesed and what chesed actually means. And when I was first thinking about what I should talk about, which type of things I should bring up, I was kind of stumped that I realized that I know a lot about chesed, a lot of examples about chesed, and chesed. Also, I think of all these examples and all the archetypes of chesed, and all the amazing people in Tanakh who were very chesed-oriented characters. When it came to understanding what the midah actually is and what we are actually here to do, I realized I actually don't know as much as I thought about the midah of chesed itself. And the principle of chesed seems so obvious that we almost overlook the depth of the concept. And it's like that I try clarifying. And it's often easiest to understand a midah through its expression and external environment, or the way that it's presented itself, or the things that we do that associate with the chesed. But in the few minutes that we have, I'd love to look at the essential nature of what chesed is, not as the acts which emanate from it, the view of chesed, loving kindness, and ahavas chesed at its core. So, start off in source 1, as we can see over here, there's a famous Gemara which talks about a man who came before Hillel and he asked him, "Teach me all of Torah whilst standing on one leg." And Hillel agreed, and he responded, "That which is hateful to you, don't do to another person. This is the entirety of Torah, and the rest is its interpretation. Go study." Now, on a simple level, the entirety of Torah was summarized on this principle of to love another person as you love yourself, which is often synonymous with the midah of chesed, which is very interesting, since the word chesed isn't actually found here, which is something hopefully that we'll come back to. So the pasuk says in source number 2, I'm just going to scroll down to it, and he says, "Olam ki amarti, olam chesed yabana," and I've said that the world is created and built on chesed. Shamayim, let me move to the side so I can see the source. So the pasuk states, "Olam chesed yabana," the world is built on chesed. And the Nativ of Shalom explains underneath in source 3. This pasuk means that Hashem Dafka chose the midah of chesed to be the midah through which the world was built and established. And he says, it was the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to choose the midah of chesed, levinyan olam, to build the B'Sefer HaChaim, shekol seder kiyam ha'olam, everything, the establishment and the building in this world, v'seder huladas habroim, and procreation, asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, sheyehei al yadei midas ha'ava v'chesed, that it should be on the midah of chesed and ahava, that at each stage of life we are basically progressing in the chesed. Children, where we are responsible only for ourselves and we are somewhat selfish, to teenagers, where we have more responsibility, to spouses, where we have to care about our husbands or wives, and then eventually to parents, where we have kids to look after. And at each stage of development, Kadosh Baruch Hu has made it that we are forced to expand our sphere of self to be able to include a wider range of people to whom we have to give. The Tiva Shalom continue. It was the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sheyehi binyan ha'olam al yadei midas chesed dafka. Dafka HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it to be the midah of chesed, through which the world is continued and built upon. Ki chafetz chesed HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires chesed. So why specifically chesed is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires from us? And what about this midah is so essential to the purpose in this world and to our lives as Torah Jews? So the pasuk in Devarim states, which I will add over here, and it says, that after HaKadosh Baruch Hu we should follow. And there is a halacha of v'halachta b'drachav, that we should follow in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's footsteps. And the Mefarshim explains to mean that we should emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the Ibn Ezra over here in 5 states. And there's really interesting lashon here, which is why I chose to use this specific source. That you shall do your utmost to imitate God's deeds and to chase after his paths according to your ability. And the Gemara in Sota develops this over here. We're not going to go into it because it's a very long Gemara, but it develops this question, basically explains that this pasuk refers to emulating the midos of Hashem, with special attention to the midah of chesed. And he goes through all the different midos of chesed, just in verse. And the Gemara continues over here. And he says that the entirety of Torah is enveloped in chesed. And it says that that the start of Torah starts with chesed, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu clothed Adam and Chava, and Torah ends with chesed as well. As Gemilas Chasadim by Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Sefer Ahavas Chesed, which is a sefer that was written by the Chavetz Chaim, and he writes about this concept, and he says that the whole of Torah not only was the start and the end of Torah enveloped in chesed, but the entirety of Torah is filled with chesed, and the main midah through which that we actually interact with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on is the midah of chesed. So why is Hashem chavetz chesed? We still haven't answered that question. Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu desire chesed so much from us? So Hashem desires a closeness to us and a relationship. And this is one of the main purposes of Torah, as it states in the Hakdama of Mesilas Yesharim, and I didn't have time to put it in. But Mesilas Yesharim talks about how the main thing that we are here to do and what we do, we fill our time with Torah and mitzvos, and we are always really being osek and trying to fulfill so many different mitzvos throughout our day, and it really takes up so much of our time. But in reality, that's the first step. We're trying to do mitzvos with the right intentions and with the right motives, but there's a goal there. And the goal of doing mitzvos and keeping Torah and mitzvos is actually to attain a level of shemus, completion ourselves, that will allow us to develop a level of dvikus, a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a relationship with him and a closeness with him, that eventually leads to the ultimate simcha, that leads to the ultimate happiness and osher, which is like a certain just calm, knowing that we are close and one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires this closeness to us. And there's a beautiful concept that's expressed by Alei Shar, Rav Wolbe, in his Sefer, and he states that mankind is called Adam in Torah. It's 2 extremities it can be. One side is that Adam comes from Adama, Notzar Adama, he's created from the ground, and he is finite and isn't all-powerful, all-knowing. We're finite, we come from the ground. But on the other side, we also have a holy faculty that's been bestowed to us, and we have a neshama, which enables us to grow and attain incredibly lofty heights and to follow in Hashem's ways, and to be what's called Adam Ele Elyon, to emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rav Desser and Michtav Eliyahu explains this, and we'll come to it a little bit later. It explains how every decision in life is either one of taking or one of giving. And so whilst it is a mitzvah and it is a midah, but the entirety of life is either taking or giving. And when we consciously choose to give, we are emulating Hashem and being Mekayim, the idea of being Adam Ele Elyon, being similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's the side of Adam that we're trying to elevate and work on. So this ultimately leads to a dvikas, a closeness to Hashem, which is one of our main purposes here, as the Mesilas Yesharim said before. So as we understand that the root of the mitzvah, right? The root of the mitzvah is to follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ways, to be close to Hashem. And one of the main ways that we can do that is through the midah of chesed, because that's the main way that we see Hashem. Why is it so valuable to Hashem that we should, and we know why it's so valuable to Hashem, that we should have chesed, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the relationship with us and wants to be close with us. But we still haven't answered what actually is chesed and how do we attain that. So interestingly, in this Gemara that we see over here in Gemara 7, I'm not sure if anyone had like this thought, but when I was going through the Gemara, it was very interesting that it chose this chesed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu clothed Adam and Chava to be the first chesed. So I was looking around and trying to find an answer, and I found something really beautiful that was in a sefer by Rabbi Yaakov Heber. And he said that it was dafka in the time, there were so many other cheseds that we see prior to this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, he gave us clothes, like he gave us food, he made the environment beautiful, he gave Adam a spouse. Like there are so many other cheseds that could have been chosen as the first chesed, but the Gemara dafka chooses this as the first chesed because he says it was dafka in this timing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu clothed Adam and Chava once they had sinned. Once, according to strict justice, he no longer needed to give to them and help them. But that was dafka what it meant to give, to be chesed oriented. And it was dafka once, like, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose to go beyond what justice dictates and beyond what was deserving to Adam and Chava to give. And that's what true chesed is. And so too we see this in the midah of Avraham, when he goes and davens for Sodom, they weren't worthy of being saved. And yet he goes beyond what justice dictates to be able to give and to be able to ask for their salvation. And it wasn't that Avraham Avinu gave in the areas that he didn't have to give, right? He gave in the area he had, and he was overflowing with the desire to help and to emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he asked to be able to save Sodom, and he went out of his way to look for opportunities to be machnis orchim. And all these things are really incredible, not because of the acts themselves, but because of the intention behind it, and because he wanted to give of himself and go beyond what justice dictates and emulating HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So as we see from here, true chesed entails going beyond the letter of the law and going beyond what HaKadosh Baruch Hu requires us. And it talks about it over here in the pasuk below, in Ahavas Chesed, and it says that like someone who really fulfills chesed is zeshemoneh atzmo lehetiv lere'ehu bli shum siba ma'achaveto mizeh. True chesed, someone who really is a baal chesed, is someone who is able to go and help someone without any reason or bias restricting him. He gives because he has the desire and ability to, and we'll kind of clarify what that means specifically soon. But whilst you can understand the importance of chesed, we want to try and understand exactly like how that works with the concept of justice. So we know that we're meant to be people who are yashar and who are emistic and who are straight people, and there are a lot of laws around. And how is it that we're expected to go beyond what justice dictates in order to be able to be chesed-oriented people? And there's an Alei Shar piece over here that I found really, really beautiful. And he writes, what would our life be without dinim? We need justice. Lo charav Yerushalayim, ela shel danu bat din Torah, velo avdu lefnim mishuras hadin. And he brings a quote from Baba Metzia, I think, and he says that the Yerushalayim was not destroyed because we weren't necessarily keeping to the shuras hadin, keeping to straight justice. We did. We were very good at keeping to halacha and keeping to the din. But Yerushalayim was destroyed because we didn't go beyond the letter of the law. And there was a space between the letters, and we weren't able to take the next step to be pursuing ahava between ben adam lechaviro, and we were amazing with the halacha, but that's not it. There's more to life and there's more to Torah than the dikta halacha and the detail itself. The shuras hadin who geder shalchinu, shuras hadin, keeping to the halacha itself, is extremely important. It's the boundaries of our life. But the life itself is going beyond what justice dictates. We can't just keep life off direct, absolute truth. Going beyond what justice dictates is the midos of chesed and ahava. And especially the generation like this, it's a responsibility when it's an amazing opportunity for us to be able to take out this from potential and make it something that we actively pursue in our lives. So from here we can see that it's an extremely important milah to balance both. Din is important, being detail-oriented and caring about the halacha itself is extremely important, but at the same time, one second, I just saw a message. Is everyone able to see the source sheet? I'm happy to share it if that's helpful with someone else. I'm happy to continue if not, but if anyone has any issues with seeing it, I'm happy to share it in a different platform. But whilst din is extremely important, keeping to the shuras hadin, being justice oriented, is extremely important. Even that has its limits and it's confined, and we have to also be able to do chesed and to be able to be oriented to. Okay, right. So I'm going to email the source sheet if that's okay. So sorry for today. Do you know how I can do that?
Sorry, it was Ayelet who asked me if I could share her source sheet. So don't worry about
very fine. Amazing. Perfect. If anyone has an issue, I'm happy to share it, but that sounds good. Okay, so there was a beautiful idea that I want to add from Daniel Bernstein on this same topic. And he says how the first piece of it was destroyed because of like the dikta halacha, but Israel at the time weren't keeping to the dikta halacha, but they had great ahava, they had great bin adam l'chaviro, and they were very close to one another, and there was a love for Torah, but there wasn't strict justice, and they weren't able to keep to the dikta halacha, to the details in the mitzvos, and that was an issue. And the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Beis HaMikdash that was chaviro, and the people of that time had a steadfast commitment to law, to halacha, but at the expense of love and kindness amongst each other. And to that generation, the Beis HaMikdash didn't return. And there's a Gemara in Yevamos that talks about it. He says that, like, I think it's actually a Gemara in Yoma. Yeah. And he talks about it. He says that the generation of the second Beis HaMikdash, they weren't zocha to see the Beis HaMikdash return because the effects of the lack of Bein Adam l'Chavero, the lack of chesed, the lack of ahava between us, between people, was still in a state of missing the Beis HaMikdash. And it's only through this midah, through Avas Chinam, through V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, through this chesed, that the Shechina can actually come and return and come back to us. So how can we attain this lofty level? So to answer this, you must understand what true chesed is. And it's necessarily defined by the act. Two people can be doing the same thing, and one person can be doing chesed, and one person can be doing a completely non-chesed oriented midah. And that's depending on what their motives are and where it's coming from. And the key to true chesed is the leiv, as expressed by Nativ of Shalom, but over here. And he says, more than any act that we're doing with our money or with our bodies, it's not about the act itself. But someone who reads as chesed, his entire essence becomes one of chesed, and he gives with all of himself. It's not about the act itself. The person who does chesed, who is a true chesed-oriented person, feels for the person standing before him as if it's really him and gives to him with all of his heart. And that's like the most elevated level of chesed that, of course, is extremely hard to attain. And it's further expressed in Ali Shar, which talks about, and because of time, I'm not going to go into it properly, but he talks about the concept of how belief is the one midah within us that is actually infinite, and Torah is infinite. And the Torah has to have a vessel that has an equal measurement to be able to fit it. And so sometimes we try to go through things intellectually, and there is intellect to it, and it's extremely important to try and understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu without intellect. But the intellect is finite. And the only area of us which is not finite, which is of infinite value, is our leiv, is our ability to love people, to be able to help people, and to be able to go out of our way beyond intellect, beyond what strict justice dictates, to be able to help them. So it's one area of us that holds infinite value. And there's a really, really beautiful story. And it's one of the last things I wanted to share before I hand it over. But there was a really beautiful story about Chanoch, and I'll read it inside. But it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu walked with Chanoch. And the Mefarshim try to explain what was it that Chanoch had that he was able to walk with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it says that he was a cobbler, and with each time that he would the shoes, he would be kind of making mystical unions with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And someone asks, what are these mystical unions? What is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was doing? What was it that he was doing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, these mystical unions? And Rabbi Yisrael Salant, who was one of the big, most original Baalei Maser, said that it can't be that he was not focusing on his work, because that's not according to halacha. He must have been focused on his work. So what are these mystical unions? And he says that the mystical unions which he attained were none other than the concentration which he invested on each stitch to ensure that it would be good and strong, providing maximum pleasure to the buyer. And this was his mystical union, something that's so close and so like normal to all of us. He was united and wholehearted in his desire and single-minded ambition to attach himself to be able to help people and to be able to use what he had to give to be able to ensure that people around him were really benefiting. And that's a true display of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. So whilst it may be difficult to achieve, at the end of the day, there is a concept of, and it talks about it over here, and he says how La'asher yitain yohav, the person that you give to, you will turn to love. So it's true, we give to people that we love naturally, but at the same time, there's also a concept of you love the people, you come to love the people that you give. The only thing that differentiates a stranger from someone that we are close to is that active switch that we can choose to work on and can choose to override, to choose to give to people and cultivate a certain relationship with them that is more feeling like family and is more feeling like beyond what a stranger usually kind of feels like. So it is difficult to achieve, but at the same time, it is definitely a switch that is a two-way relationship. We give to the people we love, and at the same time, we also are able to love the people that we give to. And it causes a spiral. So at the end, there was a couple of things I would have gone through, but again, because of the time, we're going to hopefully skip through it. But essentially, just to summarize, when it comes to the principle of we say that we should follow Hakadosh Baruch Hu's ways, and the end of that pasuk says, "Leman tovlach," in order that it will be good for you. And the Mepharshim ask, why is it good for us to follow in Hashem's ways? Why is it good for us to do chesed? Essentially, what the Mepharshim say is that when we focus our energies on giving to the world around us and bringing godly light into our surroundings, so too there's an essence of midah keneged midah, as you see in the, I'm just going to find it above, the Tehillim above, which says that Hashem chesed ki atah tishayim ish k'ma'aseu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu rewards each man according to his deeds. And so when we do chesed and we put out into the world chesed, going beyond what justice dictates, so too HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes out of his way to bring us godly light and to act with us directly from a midah of chesed. Meaning that even if by strict justice we're not deserving of salvation in X, Y, or Z, our initiation of chesed allows us to be saved through this very midah of chesed from Hashem. And this is what we talk about when we say Magen Avraham in our tefillot. So the Mepharshim say that the Magen Avraham, the shield of Avraham, is actually the fact that he had chesed, and he was able to initiate a level of chesed with people going beyond dictates, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu went out of his way to be able to create a shmir for Avraham. He was always safe and protected. So I want to end off with this final quote, which I thought was really interesting, from Michtav Eliyahu, written by Rav Dessler, and he writes, "These two powers of giving and taking form the roots of all character traits or actions. And note, there is no middle way. It is basic law that there is no middle path in human interests between the values of giving or taking. The heart of giving inheres only in the person who is happy, not just satisfied with his lot. We have already seen how the heart of one in a state of joy broadened to encompass all who are close to him. The more joyful the person, the greater desire that all his friends take part in his joy. And so it is with the giver, firmly rooted in the spiritual life, his eyes turned towards its heights. He sees everything great and small, the loving kindness which are unending, and his mercies which have no limit. Consequently, his joy in these gifts know no bounds, and his life is unendingly happy. Out of this fullness of joy and happiness flow giving and love. Thus, the urge to do good to others, to make others happy, is not produced by a lack or deficiency. This is the spiritual level of the greatest tzaddikim who act to love." So, to summarize, when we looked at the Eben Ezra before above, over here, you can see that it said that we should do lefi cholatechem k'ma'asav, and we should chase after HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ways. And it's why the reason why the pasuk in Ibn Ezra is saying this is because we should actually see every single opportunity of chesed as zechus, leman tovlach. It's good for us to be able to do chesed because we are able to receive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu a much closer relationship. And it's the entire way we were created is to, in order to build a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to be davuk to him and to emulate him. And so every opportunity to do chesed is an opportunity and we should chase after it. But what chesed means sometimes requires a certain mindset shift, and it doesn't mean doing crazy acts or making the biggest gestures. You can sometimes just even like sending a short text to somebody or doing something very, very small or just smiling at a person. So when like it doesn't cost anything. And as long as we are doing it according to our abilities, as he stresses over here, not everyone has the same kochos and not everybody has the same ability to do chesed in the same way, but we each have a certain nakuda, a certain point that everybody is extremely powerful in. And if we can use that midah, which we're naturally overflowing with, naturally have, to be able to give to other people, we would be in a really, really incredible position. And this is what we see, that Chanukh was able to attain the loftiest heights of chesed and the closest relationship with Hashem based off a simple, like his ability to be a cobbler, an amazing cobbler. And in that way, he was able to attain the loftiest heights that most people didn't attain. So to summarize, whilst instinctively we know that the rule of chesed is to love a person as we love ourselves, we often obviousness found in this comparison. So chesed is not based on anything or external action, but rather it's a midah that is defined by an internal state and essence. And the definition of chesed is loving kindness for a reason. True chesed is giving from a place of contentedness and having what to give, not needing to fill a space. And it emanates from a place of wanting to expand our sphere of self, to envelop more and more people progressively. And we can achieve this from a place of love, from a place of heart, of loving other people. And as told, when we give more, we develop a love for others more and in a cycle, and cultivate more chesed within our surrounding. And in doing so, creating this sense of ahavas chinam, we're loving our fellows regardless of strict justice and overriding what justice dictates. Ezra Hashem will be zocha to experience this strong dveikus, this relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and be worthy of receiving from him the midas hachesed, which creates a space for the Shekhinah to rest amongst us. And Ezra Hashem will be able in this way to actually be zocha to bring Moshiach from here B'Yamiro as the final and everlasting Beso Mikdash Ezra Hashem. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you so much. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I think at the end.
Yeah, we'll do questions at the end. Thank you so much, Mikhaela, for such a profound and meaningful analysis of Chesed. We move now to Tamara Ezekial, who's speaking to us on acting humbly, covering the ego. Tamara went to Hasmin High School and then to Benos Avigal Sem. She's studying linguistics at UCL. So thank you, Tamara. Hand over to you now.
Thanks so much. Hi. And Mikhaela, thank you as well. You've spent your whole year doing chesed, so special to hear from someone who's so involved in it. I'm also going to share my screen. Okay. So if we were to play a word association game with the word sneas, I think we would come up with words like covering up, concealing, hiding, anything along the lines of a dress code. But what we're going to learn together now will, Emerit Hashem, give us a bit of a different angle, a different take. So let's look at the Gemara on the pasuk that we're dealing with. So the pasuk we're focusing on tonight is this pasuk from Micha, which Hashem tells us the three big fundamentals that he expects all Jews to live by. And the one I'm focusing on is V'hatzneya leches im Elokecha. So the word that we're focusing on is V'hatzneya. So I'm not going to translate it because hopefully we're going to learn the translation together. So this tzneya walks with Hashem. So we could translate it as humble, modest, anything like that, but we're going to discover a deeper meaning. So let's look at this Gemara in Sukkah, our first source. So walking in this humble way with Hashem, what does this mean? Okay, it's going to sound very strange, but this is the Gemara, okay? It's escorting someone who is deceased and escorting a bride to her wedding. Okay, sounds super strange so far. And this is a kal v'chomer argument, which means that on the basis of one thing, we then draw something even stronger. I think it's called a fortiori in English. I think it's maybe the Latin or whatever. These things that we do so publicly, Amra Torah hatzneya leches. The Torah says, do these things humbly, these things that are so public, do those things quietly. The things that we do privately, al achas kama v'kama. How much more so does the Torah expect us to do those things quietly? Because the Torah is giving the example of something so big, like a wedding. Now they're not so big, but when they were so big, these kinds of events, how much more so are we going to keep private things private? So this Gemara is quite perplexing. What on earth has a bride and attending a levaya got to do with tznius? Seemingly, it seems so disconnected, but we're hopefully going to tie it all together at the end. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next source. What I love about this source is that it takes a Mishnah that I think we often use to mean something very classic. We're going to get to it soon. And this explanation from the Arvei Nachal, which is a sefer written by Rav David Shlomo Eibeshitz, it totally flips it on its head, which I think is amazing. So there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers, and it goes as follows. B'makom she'ein anashim, in a place where there are no men, hishtadal lihiyos ish, strive to be a man. In other words, when you see a lack in society, go and fill it. For example, we could take last week's parasha, Pinchas. We see Pinchas as this person he saw something going wrong. He saw Zimri and Cosby sinning, And he got up and he did something about it. He saw that there was a problem and he filled it. I would say a more contemporary example, someone who I very much see as a role model, and probably one of the reasons I'm able to share this Torah, would be Sarah Shanira, right? She saw that there was a haskalah. She saw that there was an enlightenment and that Jewish girls weren't getting the education they needed, the Torah education. And she set up Beis Yaakov, and she made us as women be able to actually sit and learn Torah, and to be able to get the right chinuch, the right education, so that we can build the right lives for ourselves and for future generations. So this is kind of how this mission is used. It's like when there's nothing going on and you need action, go out there and do it. And now we're going to see it totally flip on its head. Okay, brace yourself. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this line. Va'amar sheyihiya ikar hishtadluso ba'avoda b'makom she'ein anashim. Okay, what does that mean? It doesn't, the Mishnah on this explanation, it's not saying when there's no people taking action, take action. It's saying in a place where there are no people at all, meaning when you're in private, hishtadal lihiyos ish, try and be an ish. Now, what's an ish? In Tanakh, the word ish is used to connote someone of importance, someone great. As the Arvei Nachal says here, Ki ish hainu gibar b'Torah b'tzadik, right? They're great in Torah and they're a righteous person. So what this Mishnah is saying is so different to the explanation that I've always learned. It's saying b'makom she'ein anashim, when nobody is watching you, hishtadal lihiyos ish, be your best self, which is totally contrary to the explanation we normally have, which is when everyone's watching and you're in public and a huge change needs to happen in the world, you go and fill it. This is saying when nobody's watching, you're going to be your greatest self. To hide what you're doing as much as possible, that when you're in the confines of your house, when you're in the confines of your bedroom, you're being your greatest self when no one else is there. Okay, so now I'm going to take a pause and we're going to think about a medrash. So I learned this actually in SEM. So I actually couldn't find the Hebrew, but I'm going to say it from, I think I can quote Mrs. Schoonmaker on this reliable source. So there are 7 things, this is from Bereshis Rabbah. There are 7 things that a person will never know. One of those things, just as an example, is the Yom HaMisa, the day that a person passes away. And a person doesn't know when that day will be, as an example. Now, another thing that a person doesn't know is very interesting. Ma belibo shal chavero, what is in the heart of his friend. Now, what that means is that we don't know what's going on in other people's heads, right? And, you know, sometimes we kind of walk into a room and we're like, do they approve of what I'm doing? Do they appreciate how long I spent buying this present? Do they acknowledge how great I've done in this job? We sometimes we try to figure out what people's thoughts are, but we never have total access to what people's thoughts are. Actually, very interesting. I was reading the Ami last night, and this author has written a fictional story about a lady who found this device, kind of like earphones, basically like AirPods. And when she put it in, she attached it to a bracelet, and she was able to hear the thoughts of those around her. And it was a nightmare. She would say to her husband, oh, I can do the dishes tonight. And then she'd put in her earpiece, and the earpiece would say, seriously, I've had such a bad day. I really don't want to do it. For shalom bayis, to keep peace in the home. Okay, I'll do it. And then he'd say out loud, sure, honey, sure, I'll do the dishes. And she who has heard his thoughts was like, really? Do you actually want to do them? And he's like, of course, I just said I would. And there was such it's just very funny to read. There's such a gap between sometimes what people think and what people are actually saying. But the idea is, of course, that this device does not exist. And we don't have access to people's innermost thoughts. We don't really know what they think. And this basically leads us to constantly be hungry for people's validation. We're always it's a human drive. We're very, what Mrs. Schoonmaker calls image conscious. We constantly feel like we're in front of an audience, as if am I saying the right things? Am I fitting in? You even see with little kids, you'll walk into a primary school and all the boys will go outside to break, let's say, without a coat. And they'll just think it's not cool to wear a coat. And you'll tell kids, the mother will tell her son, you really need to put on a coat when it's raining. But he won't put it on because none of his friends are, because he's already thinking, what are they going to think? Will they approve? So we're kind of hardwired to constantly be thinking, what does everyone else think? Okay. So with that kind of in mind, we're going to return to the Gemara. Okay. Let's go back to the wedding. So I'm going to go into the mindset of someone. Okay. Let's say this is a person. I walk into the wedding and I'm like, is my dress nice enough? I think I'm a bit too fancy. Oh no, the sister of the color, the sister of the bride, her dress is too similar to mine. I should have checked in advance. Then I'm like, oh, like what's the dinner going to be? Oh, I hope it's chicken. I really like chicken. And then we're dancing and I'm like, when's she going to pull me into the circle? I'm waiting for her to dance with me. Doesn't she realize I live in Manchester? Like, why isn't she putting me into the circle? And we have all these thoughts going on in our head, like the whole way through the wedding. And it's totally me. It's like, does she realize I came to the wedding? Is she going to dance with me? And we've got a lot going on inside. And in fact, the same thing can even happen at a Levi. We're going to be there for someone, and sometimes the thought can come into our heads of like, do they realize how much I've been there for them? You know, do they realize I had to take off for work to be here? And we kind of have a lot of thoughts of like me, like, does everyone realize that I came? Am I late? Am I too early? Am I overdressed? Am I underdressed? And we have all these thoughts going on, and there's nothing to do with what's going on around us. It's totally like our own world. And the way Mrs. Schoonmaker explains it is that Hashem deliberately created us image conscious. It's not a curse. It's a reality, and we're supposed to use that to transcend. What do I mean? Like I said before, we have this, we're constantly feeling like we're performing for an audience, like we're trying to impress someone, like we're constantly trying to get someone's approval or someone's attention or someone's thank you or someone's appreciation. And the reason for that is because Hashem hardwires us already to have God consciousness, that we're constantly in front of the audience, in front of an audience of one, which is him, Hashem. And in order for us to be God conscious, he first has to create us image conscious, so that we're aware that we're constantly in front of someone. While we take it to mean we're constantly in front of everyone else. We're constantly trying to keep up with everyone around us and thinking, is my dress too fancy or not fancy enough? And am I overdressed and underdressed? When really we're supposed to be focusing on one, and that's Hashem. So the Sifsei Chaim defines tznius as the covering of the ego. Now, when we say covering, it sounds so negative. So I wanted to give a couple of examples. When we say Shema, we actually cover our eyes. And we don't see this as a negative at all. It's actually very beautiful. Because when we're saying Shema, what we're saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We're saying Hashem is one. I'm now declaring basically the most important fundamental, except these three fundamentals, which we're now learning. Except for that, we're declaring this important fundamental that there's nothing in the world except Hashem. He is running everything. And if he took his finger off the button, so to speak, that kept us all alive, there would be nothing left in the universe. And we're tapping into that. And that concept is just so powerful. We just have to cover our eyes and just tap into that. Our physical vision is no way near enough to absorb that. So we cover our eyes. Another example of when we cover and we see it as something beautiful and powerful is by the Shabbos candles, right? Women cover their eyes when they light Shabbos candles. And part of that, it's almost symbolic. It's saying the Kedusha of Shabbos, the holiness of Shabbos that I'm now ushering in. It's just so pure and it's so holy that I'm not going to look at it straight with my eyes. I'm going to cover my eyes because I want my spiritual vision to first greet Shabbos before my physical vision. So covering is not a negative thing. Covering is actually saying what my physical senses are going to pick up is just not enough. I want my spiritual to transcend. So when we say that tznius is about covering that voice, covering over kind of that voice inside our head saying, am I dressed? Am I not overdressed, underdressed? We're not saying, oh, repress yourself. That's not the point at all. The point is we have such a powerful self inside of us, a self that's supposed to transcend and be God conscious. But because we get so distracted with these other secondary things, we want to cover it over so that we can allow our real self to come out, because our real self is not the self saying, when's the bride's going to dance with me? That's not our real self. It's just an extraneous thought that comes into our heads, but we just follow the wrong train track. And covering of the ego is supposed to lead us onto the right train track in order to allow us to maximize our relationship with Hashem. And what happens we're at a wedding and we do this tznius, right? Like the Gemara says, we do this tznius and we actually cover our ego. What it means is that I walk into the wedding and I say, Shavisi Hashem lenegdi tamid. I place Hashem before me always. This is the reality that all Jews live with. that enables me to cover my ego, because I'm not performing for anyone else. I'm performing for Hashem, one entity who's watching me, one God. He's watching me. Oh, what am I doing at the wedding? Oh, I came to fulfill a mitzvah. Which mitzvah? Misameach chosan v'kala. I came to make the bride and groom happy. So the whole wedding, what am I focused on? Wow, the bride looks so happy. I'm so excited for her. She looks so beautiful. It's so fun dancing with her. Oh, I hope she's really enjoying it. Wow, she gets to dance with all her family. This is so much fun. That's what it's about. Oh, wow, she looks so beautiful in the pictures. It's about her. It's not about me, because I walked in and I planned beforehand. Oh, my mindset. My mindset is to be Shvisi Hashem and Negdi Tamid, to be God conscious. Yes, to be image conscious, because I naturally am as a human, but not of everyone else thinking, oh, she came late, she came early, when's she going to dance with me? But rather, I'm transcending that. I'm thinking, I am performing for someone, for Hashem, and he wants me to make the bride happy. So that's my whole focus the whole night. And then when I dance, you won't even notice if she pulls you into the circle or not, because anyway, you'll be happy, because you'll be so focused on the right thing. And that's why covering the ego, I can't even translate it in English. It doesn't even sound good. It sounds so negative, like we're squashing our inner self. No, we're bringing out our inner self. That's the most real self we can get. The fake self is the one with all the silly thoughts that pop into our heads. And to come back to the Arvei Nachal, right, we said b'makom she'ein anashim, in the place where there are no people, hishtadal lios ish. That's where you should strive your hardest to be your best self. Where's the only place in the world where there are no people? Inside our heads. Inside our minds, we can achieve our greatest godless, our true greatness. Because inside my head, I can be standing next to a friend at a wedding, and I can be totally focused on the color, on the bride, and on how I'm so excited to be there for her as her friend and to dance with her. And the person standing next to me can be totally like what I said before, with the dress and am I late and when she's going to pull me in. And we can both be exactly the same wedding, come the same time, leave the same time, but one of us will transcend and the other one didn't. And that's what Bahatsnei Aleches means. And we end it what? Im Elakacha, with Hashem. Because when I'm walking humbly and I'm covering my ego, that's when I'm walking with Hashem. Because unless I cover over my ego, I'm not walking with Hashem, I'm walking with the whole world. I'm checking up if they think I'm funny, and if they think I'm clever enough, and if they think I'm whatever else it is, if I'm on time or dressed nicely enough. But when I cover over my ego, I'm walking with Hashem, because he's the only being I want to walk with. He's the only being I want to be impressing. And I just want to end off with something very powerful I heard recently from, he's called Rabbi Travis. I just think this is a really powerful way to end off. We mentioned that this pasuk, Shavisi Hashem. Oh, I have it here. I forgot about the source sheet. Sorry. Shavisi Hashem lenegdi samid. I place Hashem before me always. Okay, it's from Tehillim. And this is the mindset of someone who's tznius, because someone who is tznius is someone who is constantly tapped into this. They're covering over their own ego in order to allow the true self to shine, to be image conscious of Hashem, not of people. And the Shulchan Aruch, the Orach Chaim section of Shulchan Aruch, right, that's the first of the 4 parts. It begins with these words. This is the first thing a Jew is told. Like, the first thing a Jew needs to know is to place Hashem before them always, from the Ramah of Moshe Isilis. And then that same section, the Orach Chaim, ends with a comment of the Ramah, who says, "The Tov Lev Mishtat Hamid." He who has a cheerful heart always has a feast, which basically means if you're happy, your life is a party. Like if you're a person who always feels happy, everything's just super fun for you. Life is great. And it just seems like such a funny pasuk for someone to put in a halakha sefer. I mean, if I would have read that in the English, I just translated it as someone who's happy is always having a party. I mean, what is that doing in a halakha sefer? People who are sitting there and learning this, they just need to get to the basics. I actually checked it up before the shit. It's talking about halachas in Adar, of whether or not people need to say tachanan, right? Because Adar, we say it's the month of Simcha. So yeah, it's about Simcha, but people are reading the Shulchan Aruch to get halacha. They're not reading it to hear about how to make life a party. But that's exactly what we're reading it for. That's exactly what we're learning these things for. Because when I walk into a wedding, whether I walk into my house, whether I walk into my job, whatever it is, if I am placing Hashem before me and I am covering over that ego of mine, and I am transcending that image consciousness, I am living a party. That's exactly what it is. If you are Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Somid, always, you are Tov Lev Mishte Somid. The two pasukim match perfectly. If you're always in a state of God consciousness, you are always living a party, because you are always aware that you're in his presence, and everywhere you go, you're not thinking, what do they think? Do they approve? Do they appreciate? You're thinking, does he appreciate? Is he happy with me? Is he proud of me? And that's what true tznius is. It's walking around, and it's totally internal, and nobody will know except yourself, right? No one's there in your head. You can let people in your head if you want, but you can push them away like uninvited guests if you wish to. And it's just about transcending, using that self-consciousness as God consciousness, and living a true party in the presence of Hashem. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed sharing. It's really close for me. So thank you. Oh, sorry, I think you're muted. Sorry, Susan.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. So thank you so much, Tamara. Such a powerful and meaningful exploration of walking humbly with Hashem. Next, we have Ayelet Besso Cowan speaking on justice, chesed, and modesty. Why these three? Ayelet went to MMY and then City University to study pediatric nursing. During that time, she worked as a youth director at Belmont and then in Israel, and did some work for Tribe. She also worked for a year in pediatric cancer ward before starting a degree in medicine last September at Barts. So Ayelet, thank you very much. I hand over to you.
Hi, I have to apologise to everyone in advance. I think following a year of Zoom learning, my laptop has decided to fully conk out on the idea. So I'm not able to share my source sheet, but I believe, thank you, Susan, for doing that. So what I'm hoping to do in the next few minutes is just to kind of bring together some of the ideas that Mikhaela and Tamara have shared in the context of the pasuk, which we have based the theme on. And it's a pasuk from Micha, which says, Higid lecha adam matov, ma Hashem darash mimcha. So it's Micha telling the nation, he said, let me tell you what's good and what Hashem wants from you. Ki masot chesed, to do justice, va'avat chesed, and to love goodness, va'asnei alechet im Elokecha, and to walk modestly with your God. And what I'd like to explore for a few minutes is kind of, how does Micha choose three? We have 613 mitzvot. So how is it that all of a sudden we're able to just condense it down into three? Susan, if you're able to scroll down to the next source, please. So there's a Gemara in Makot, which discusses this idea. And there are a number of times in Tanakh where various leaders have come along and tried to kind of compress the ideas of the Torah into a smaller number of things to focus on. And the first one is David. And in Tehillim number 15, he says, Mi yagur ba'ohalecha, mi yishkon bahar kodshecha. Who's going to live in the tent of Hashem, and who's going to dwell on his holy mountain? And then there's a full list of the sort of person that will be. It's one who walks wholeheartedly, who is righteous, speaks truth in his heart, he has no slander, he doesn't do anything evil towards his neighbor, and the list continues. He neither gives his money with interest nor takes a bribe, and the Gemara goes on to say that one who performs all of these 11 things will enter the world to come. And then later on in Tanakh, Yeshaya comes along and he compresses the ideas of the Torah into only 6 ideas. And his the chosen ones are one, he who walks righteously, speaks uprightly, despises the gains of oppressions, shakes his hand from holding of bribes, he doesn't listen to bad things, and he shuts his eyes from looking upon evil. And we're just able to scroll down again, and then we come to Micha, and he's slightly later on in Jewish history, and he came and he took the 613 mitzvot and he shortened it down to the 3 that I mentioned in the pasuk. So if we continue down to the Rashi, which is source number 5, Rashi explains that when David established the commandments as only 11, the reason why he did this was because in the beginning we were righteous, and we were able to accept upon ourselves many commandments. But later generations weren't so righteous, and if they were if we would try to keep all of the mitzvot, then it would be near impossible. And so David came along and established 11 things that we had to reach in order that people would be able to attain the level required to reach Olam Haba. And then in later generations, Yeshayahu and then Micha and Habakkuk later on, although I haven't brought that source, also further and further made it simpler and simpler for everyone to reach the level required of them. So what I want to do for a moment is just focus on the context in which Micha's operating and why he felt the need. So the book of Micha is set in a time where there's lots of sinning. The people of Israel have split into the 2 nations. There's the nation of Israel and he so the book of Micha kind of has 4 main themes. At the beginning, Hashem sort of descends over the people and he delivers a load of curses because of how badly they're behaving. Then later on, Micha condemns all the leaders and the prophets of the nation of Israel and of Yehuda, and he blames the leaders for the nation's corruption. Then slightly later on, Micha goes into a lot of detail about what the days of Moshiach might look like. He gives some details of the process and the purpose of the process. And then we come to this bit of Micha where he's sort of talking about redemption again, but of the process from the perspective of what's required of us to reach it. So if we just go to source 6, which is the same as source 1, but because I wasn't able to control, I thought it'd be easier to just put it in again. And just to look at the beginning of this chapter and what's going on. So it begins by saying, so Micha brings all the nation together before the mountains. And he says, and then Hashem says to the people, my people, what have I done to you? What hardship have I caused you? Please tell me, and what's so hard about what I've asked of you? And then Hashem reminds them of things he's done for them. I brought you up from Egypt. I freed you from slavery. I gave you leaders, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. And then when Balak plotted against you and Balaam tried to curse you, I saved you from that. And what do I want from you? I don't want from you burnt offerings. I don't want thousands of rams or streams of oil. Rather, what I want from you is to do justice, goodness, and walk modestly with Hashem. So Hashem's telling us that it's not about the Beit HaMikdash. It's not about it's not all focused on just bringing sacrifices. There's a lot more to it. So the Radak on this bit of Tanakh explains that Asot Mishpat is about the idea of Ben Adam L'Chavero. To do justice is how we behave towards each other. And then Avat Chesed, doing goodness, one would expect that that would be the one that he would consider to be Ben Adam L'Chavero, between man and man. But he says that that is going above and beyond what's required of you. And then V'atznei Alechet im Elokecha is between man and God. And that's how he explains these 3 ideas. But then the Maharsha, who is source number 8, unfortunately I wasn't able to find English for some of these, explains that with Yeridat HaDorot, so as the nations went on, generations went on and they became less and less righteous, and there were also more and more changing circumstances. There were more and more mitzvot which the people were not able to perform, or they were limited to certain groups in certain situations. So for example, the Kohanim and the Leviim serve in the Beit HaMikdash. There are certain mitzvot that are only for women, certain mitzvot that can only be performed in the land of Israel. But the mitzvot that David, Ishaya, and Micha chose were all mitzvot that everyone can aspire to achieve. And much of Judaism is about kind of a good ethical sense. It's about giving rules for life which are most reflexive, and moral people would accept those things as things that we would strive to in order to be good people and to build a just society. And a godly religion is not just for recognition of those kind of decent people around you. It requires living well despite what others may think of you. And we don't need other reasons to be good people other than simply for l'shem shamayim. And the idea of Vatznei Alechet, which is what Tamara was explaining, was about being private about it. It's not about virtue signaling, which is something that is increasingly common nowadays on social media and other places, where you have influencers who post about things that they feel passionate about in order that other people follow in their ways, but they do it to kind of show off, I'm doing this thing and look at me and look at all these things I'm doing and you should be like me. And what this pasuk is trying to teach us is we are expected to do lots of things. Hashem expects lots of things of us, but do it privately, do it because you want to do it, not necessarily because you want everyone else to see you doing it. You're not doing it to show to everyone else how good you are, you're doing it for yourself. And then a different approach to this is the Maharal in Tiferet Yisrael, and he says that we're not removing mitzvot. All 613 mitzvot are still very important, but rather what we're doing is we are listing a number of mitzvot that describe the way that a person should be. And if Hashem's only asking these three things of us, then all of the other mitzvot of the Torah must come under these three brackets. So one might think that the reason we have mitzvot is to humble us. So a lot of the mitzvot would come under the bracket of Vatznei Alechet. But actually, a closer examination would show that actually a lot of them come under the idea of chesed. In fact, Hasidim, or those that daven with Nusach Sfard, I've got an excerpt of the Haggadah, is that before doing a mitzvah, they say, Hineni muchanim zuman l'kayim mitzvah. So here I am ready to perform a certain mitzvah. And then they say what the mitzvah is and why they're doing it. And then at the end, they say, B'Shem Kol Yisrael, I'm doing this in the name of all of Israel. So they're not just performing the mitzvah for themselves, but it's an act of chesed for the whole of Israel. And then in order to have a proper legal system, we have laws that we don't always understand. So in modern day, it could be driving at 50 instead of 70 or 70 instead of 60, whatever it is. We don't necessarily know why exactly we're driving at those speeds, but that's the law. And we have a lot of chukim in Torah that we don't necessarily understand why they're there. But in order to have a proper working legal system, it's required of us. And there's a Gemara in Sota that explains what the world will look like in the days of Moshiach. And one of the things that it says that high costs will increase, and there'll be lots of grape for fruit, but wine will be expensive. And then one of the other things that it says, which is what I'd like to focus on, is that it's right at the end of the sources that there'll be a lack of truth, and there'll be a lot of sheker, a lot of lies in the world. And sheker is the opposite of justice, the opposite of the way we're supposed to be. And I would say that in the generation that we live in at the moment, there's a huge amount of chutzpah in the world, and there is, in some places, very little truth. And in some ways, we are living in a world of sheker, and it's one of the kind of biggest things that this current generation might have to address is looking at how do we live in a just, correct way in this current generation. And what this pasuk is teaching us is that to come close to Hashem, we have to focus on these three things, but from that we build out actually most of the ideas of the Torah come under these things. So one, I'm sorry, I'm just trying, because my laptop's broken, I'm not able to access some of my notes. So I'm just trying to, if you bear with me one moment, I apologize. Okay, I think I apologize for this, but I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to open the floor to any questions just because I'm unable to access some of the things I wanted to say. But I just want to thank Tamara and Mikhaela also for speaking before me, and also for Nair for inviting all of us to speak this evening. I apologize for my abbreviated share, but my laptop has finally given up on me.
Thank you so much, Ayelet. Really thoughtful share. And thanks to all three of you, Mikhaela, Tamara, and Ayelet, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us tonight and really inspiring us in such profound ways. We're very blessed in our community to have women of such talent. So thank you to all three of you. Next week is the last share in our series. Dr. Hagit Blass will be speaking on the history, context, and meaning of the prayer for the state and the royal family. We can open up for questions if anyone wants to ask any of our three speakers any questions. It was a huge amount of information to absorb. I think you could have had the whole hour, each of you, we could have had a 3-hour session here. So for next week's share, if anyone wants to make a dedication for next week's share, let me know or Naomi Landy know. And I thank you all very much for joining us, and to our speakers as well. You can see the thanks in the chat, which is great. All right, wish you all good night, and thank you again.